particularly amongst the ancient Egyptians, but also fantastically advanced amongst the Maya. The theory that it was just a tomb and nothing else is bust. That is not a satisfactory theory anymore.
Deep in Guatemala's northeastern jungle, Tulane archaeologist Francisco Estrada-Belli and his team used LiDAR to reveal a hidden tomb at Chochkitam.
I think this is probably the crowning achievement of my archaeological career.
Beneath vines and rubble, they found well-preserved treasures, a mosaic jade mask, femur bones etched with hieroglyphs, rare Spondylus shells, and ceremonial vessels. Looters stopped short, leaving a sealed chamber untouched for over 1,000 years. What lay inside stunned experts.
That would be incredibly awesome, and not because it's a tomb and it's got some glamour, but it's because it's history.
Stay with us as we unpack the finds, the mystery, the story they tell, and more. Jade mask in the dark. In early 2022, deep in the Petén region of Guatemala, a team of archaeologists stumbled upon something that would change their understanding of Maya history and possibly give them chills in the process. This 1,700-year-old site was near Chochkitam, a place so smothered by jungle that even the sunlight struggled to find its way in. For decades, this land had kept its secrets well, until technology gave humans a peek beneath the green blanket. The discovery began not with a shovel, but with LiDAR, light detection and ranging, a laser mapping technology that can see through dense vegetation. On their scans, researchers noticed something odd, a shape that didn't match the curves and randomness of nature. It had edges, symmetry, the fingerprints of human hands from centuries ago. Francisco Estrada-Belli, a well-known Maya archaeologist, immediately suspected this wasn't just another hill. It was a hidden structure, a pyramid to be exact, concealed for more than 1,000 years. When his team reached the spot, they found an entrance of sorts. But it wasn't their doing. Looters had already been there, digging a tunnel into the pyramid. Thankfully, the robbers had stopped short, barely scratching the surface of what lay within. The heart of the pyramid and its royal tomb remained untouched. When the real excavation began, the team's excitement grew. A narrow passageway twisted down into the darkness, leading to a burial chamber. Time had taken its toll. The stone ceiling had partly collapsed, and centuries of decay clung to the air. Yet, astonishingly, much of the tomb's contents had survived. And in the dim light of their lamps, one object stood out immediately, a mosaic jade mask, its green surface catching the light like frozen water. Back in the lab in late June 2022, Estrada-Belli carefully examined small blocks of jade, known as tesserae. These were no random fragments. In ancient Maya culture, such jade pieces were often fitted together to create burial masks for rulers, masks meant to honor the dead, connect them to the gods, and project their power into the afterlife. With practiced hands, Estrada-Belli began piecing the tiles together. Soon a face emerged, spiral eyes, sharp teeth, and an expression that was part divine, part terrifying. But the surprises didn't stop there. A sharp-eyed colleague spotted something strange about a few bones in the chamber. They were covered in fine carvings, delicate yet razor-sharp, likely made using volcanic obsidian glass. Even stranger, 2 of the bones didn't belong to the tomb's main occupant at all. The carvings on them told a story, one that revealed the ruler's name and his connection to the mask. One carving showed a ruler holding up the severed head of a Maya deity. And that deity? It was the same god depicted in the jade mask. Spiral eyes, sharp teeth, and all. The inscriptions gave the ruler's name, Itsam Kokaj Balam, which translates to sun god, bird, or jaguar. The god he held was Yaxwayab Chakji-1, a manifestation of the Maya storm god, its name meaning first sorcerer rain god. For Estrada-Belli, this was no ordinary discovery. It was a window into a world where kings were not just leaders, but divine intermediaries wielding both political and supernatural power. Spiny riches. Estrada-Belli's team found more than a few trinkets. Buried with the ruler were over 16 rare mollusk shells, Spondylus shells, from a spiny oyster that lived in distant seas. To the Maya, these shells were priceless. They were used as money, cut into jewelry, and offered in rituals. Holding one marked someone as powerful, rich, and tied to the wider world beyond Chochkitam. But the shells were only part of the story. The team also found bones carved with tiny, careful designs. Some carvings show a man holding a jade mask that looks exactly like the mask found in the tomb. Others are carved with glyphs, blocks of writing, that researchers believe name the king's father and grandfather. Those names link him to other great cities like Tikal and Teotihuacan. The carvings don't just decorate the bones, they tie this ruler into a web of family and power. These findings change how we see Chochkitam. During the king's life, the city wasn't a vast capital. Estrada-Belli describes it as a medium-sized city with modest public buildings. Between 10 and 15,000 people lived in the town itself, and another 10,000 lived nearby. Yet the wealth buried with this king shows he held sway beyond those plain buildings. The Spondylus shells, the jade mask, and the carved bones speak of trade, influence, and sacred power. There is a quiet thrill to moments like this. It's a tremendous thrill and a privilege, Estrada-Belli said. Archaeology can feel like detective work, but it is also a slow unmasking of lives once lived. Each shell, each carved line, each glyph draws a clearer picture of who this king was and how he fit into the Maya world. What comes next matters. The team plans DNA tests on the bones to learn who this man was, where his family came from, and how he was related to other rulers. DNA could confirm the links the glyphs hint at, or surprise researchers with new connections. They will also keep digging. The tomb was only one part of the site, and the city could hold houses, workshops, and more tombs that tell how people lived. For now, the jade mask, the carved bones, and shiny shells are the loudest voices. They tell of trade routes that reach the sea, of fathers and grandfathers who ruled or married into power, and of a king who wore a mask that tied him to a god. These items show that even a medium-sized city could play a big role in Maya politics and religion. Archaeologists sometimes call a find lucky, and luck helped here. The looters stopped short, leaving the heart of the tomb sealed. But luck alone didn't explain what the team learned. Careful work, patient study, and steady curiosity turned a dark room into a room full of answers. Sacred order. There seemed to be a ritual perfection in how everything was placed inside the tomb. The jade mask sat above a carved femur, as if crown and bone had been linked on purpose. That pairing felt like a message. The king's face and his bloodline were meant to meet the divine. The inscriptions on the bone were short but loaded. One glyph used a sign often tied to rulership, hinting at links to great houses in Tikal and even far-off Teotihuacan. Other bones carried finer marks that looked like family records, names and signs meant to show descent. They claimed this ruler belonged to a powerful line tied across cities. Different materials told different parts of the story. Jade spoke of the heavens and authority. Shells and ceramics spoke of trade and daily life. Bones recorded lineage and ritual. Together they formed a kind of royal shorthand, items chosen to prove who the ruler was and what he meant to his people. The chamber was quiet and focused. The pyramid above had mostly held its shape, and even the partially collapsed ceiling worked in the tomb's favor. Fallen stones created pockets where dust settled and preserved the tiny carved details. In some spots, layers of dust kept painted marks and fine incisions pristine, so modern specialists could trace the smallest lines. Symmetry was important. The room's focal points drew the eye. The mask at the center, the carved femur below, and ceramic vessels arranged nearby. It suggested the burial was planned by people who knew the right forms for public display in sacred contexts. The inscriptions on the femurs were striking. Though brief, they read like a short royal tale. One clear reading suggested the buried man was honored as both king and a being that had crossed into the sphere of the gods. Paired with the jade mask, likely representing a thunder or storm deity, these texts reinforced a vision of a ruler who was more than mortal. The mask offered divine protection. The bone inscriptions offered lineage and authority. Pottery filled the quieter corners. Unlike the mask's lavish work, most ceramics were plain and local, made by hand in the surrounding community. Chemical tests later showed traces of cacao and fermented maize inside some pots. Those residues point to ceremonial drinks, the kind poured in rites meant to feed or fortify a spirit on its journey. Future readings reveal political ties and rites lost to time. Taken together, the objects showed a consistent plan: honor the dead, display power, and bind the ruler to gods and ancestors. The tomb was not a random stash of goods. It was a staged message, meant to be read by anyone who knew how: priests, nobles, or visiting allies. Jungle X-ray. Chochkitam sits where three countries almost meet: Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize, a place thick with jungle and older than anyone walking its paths today. For years, people knew ruins were here, but the trees and time hid most of it. Early explorers and archaeologists spotted crumbling stones from the air. They dug in places they could reach, but the full story stayed buried. Everything changed when LiDAR came into play. LiDAR is a laser that flies over the forest and measures the ground below. Think of it as giving an X-ray to the jungle floor. Where leaves and vines block the view, LiDAR draws lines and shapes: pyramids, roads, terraces, even shallow tunnels. For Chochkitam, those laser scans were the map that made modern digging possible. Francisco Estrada-Belli and his team used those maps as a treasure guide. The LiDAR data flagged odd shapes, bumps and straight edges that shouldn't be there if nature made them. One anomaly matched an entrance that looters had cut years before. The robbers had tunneled in but stopped just short of the real prize, a sealed burial chamber. In a way, that half-finished tunnel saved the tomb. It left the innermost room intact. Once they knew where to look, the team slowed down. No big machines, no careless shovels. They worked with brushes, small trowels, and careful measuring tools. Every scrap of soil was screened. Every find logged with exact GPS points. The goal was to keep the context where things sat, because in archaeology, where an object is can be as important as the object itself. The tomb itself showed skill. Builders used local limestone, cut and fitted with little mortar. Even where the ceiling had partly fallen, the walls held a shape that spoke to good planning and strong hands. The chamber had been sealed with a stone wall that looked hurried, as if someone had rushed to close it up. That odd detail points to a tense time, maybe a sudden death, a threat, or a political crisis that pushed people to lock the king away quickly. This dig wasn't a one-team show. Experts in scripts, pottery, metals, and bones joined. Samples went to labs in Guatemala and abroad for chemical and microscopic tests. Those studies help answer big questions. Where did the king grow up? What did he eat as a child? Where did the shells and jade come from? And how does the art match pieces from Tikal or Teotihuacan? Comparing new LiDAR maps with old photos and dusty field notes also mattered. The fresh digital images filled gaps in the older records. They showed looters' tunnels snaking under the ground and revealed small platforms and causeways that earlier surveys missed. What looked like empty jungle on 20th century maps now read as a busy, planned landscape. This is how modern archaeology works. New technology opens a door, careful hands walk through, and many minds piece the story together. At Chochkitam, lasers found what the trees hid. Patient excavation kept that find honest, and a web of specialists is turning stones and bones into history. The rushed sealing of the chamber adds a mystery. Why hurry a king into the dark? For now, the answer waits in the dirt, the cracks of the walls, and the glyphs on the bones. And the team isn't done digging. Packed for the afterlife. The tomb feels less like a haphazard stash and more like a carefully packed travel kit, one built to guide a king through a dangerous trip after death. The objects follow a clear ritual order seen in other royal Maya burials: mask and personal adornment near the head, carved bones and lineage markers at the center, and vessels holding food and drink arranged where they would be reached by the dead. It wasn't random. Each piece had a job. Those ceramic vessels matter a lot. They weren't everyday bowls. Many were made to hold ritual drinks, including a special cacao beverage often served only to nobles. Archaeologists have found chemical traces in similar urns elsewhere that match cacao and fermented maize, meaning these were powerful ceremonial drinks. For the Maya, a cup like that wasn't a luxury. It was fuel for the soul's journey and proof of status in life and death. Jade, too, plays a huge role. The green mask is not just a decoration. Jade symbolized life, growth, and the heart of the maize plant. Ideas tied to fertility and rebirth. Placing jade near a skull or chest could mean giving the dead king a new sacred body for the next world. Spondylus shells, the spiny oysters found in the tomb, carried their own meaning. They were luxury imports, signs of long-distance trade, and tokens tied to rain and fertility. Together, jade and shell announced that this man was wealthy, powerful, and ritually prepared. The bones tell a story, too. Short inscriptions on the femurs act like name tags and short biographies. They link the dead to known ruling lines and to the divine. In Maya belief, ancestry was a form of authority. Rulers showed their right to rule by naming ancestors, performing bloodletting, and staging public rituals that proved their connection to the gods. Carving a family line on bone was a literal and lasting way to affirm heritage. All of this fits with how the Maya imagined death. They pictured a long, risky road to the underworld, Xibalba, a place of tests and tricky gods. The Popol Vuh, the Maya creation tale, tells how the hero twins faced the lords of Xibalba and passed challenges. A king's burial goods were meant to help him through similar trials: food for strength, masks for protection, names to call on powerful ancestors, and shells or offerings to secure favor from rain and fertility gods. If the soul succeeded, the Maya thought rebirth or elevated status might follow. Modern science will read these signs more closely, so this burial is both a faith and a statement, a carefully planned kit for an afterlife trip and a public claim about rank and power. It shows how the Maya blended belief and politics, making death itself a stage for asserting who mattered and who would be remembered. Ritual ring. Just outside the main tomb, the dig opened a second story, one of ceremony and community, not just grave goods. A loose circle of stone markers caught the team's eye first. Faint red ochre stained several stones, and tests showed the pigment had been specially prepared. These were not writing stones. They looked like a boundary, an area set aside for short rituals or offerings. A short walk away ran a low, stone-lined channel. Its soil held high levels of phosphorus and nitrogen, signs you don't get from ordinary forest dirt. That chemical fingerprint suggests repeated feasting or special planting tied to ancestor honor. In other words, people came here again and again to eat, drink, or perform tasks meant to feed the dead or please them. Bits of broken shells turned up too. These were different from the Spondylus shells found inside the tomb, and their styles hinted they came from the coast. If so, someone brought goods from far away for rituals here, evidence of trade weaving into local ceremonies. Near a collapsed wall, tiny clusters of carbonized feathers appeared, likely from local birds. These burned feather fragments read like symbols: air, life, fertility. Elsewhere, archaeologists found plain clay tokens with simple imprints. They weren't high art. They felt like community pieces, small items made by local hands for everyday ritual acts, or to mark who took part in a ceremony. Traces of old tree roots showed up in soil samples near the stones. Those roots may be the remains of a sacred tree, the kind of living link between sky and earth that appears in Maya thought. The team plans microbotanical studies and more chemical tests to nail down what each feature really means. But already a picture is clear. The tomb sat inside a wider sacred place. It wasn't only about kings and masks. It brought together elite ritual and communal acts, trade goods and local offerings, priests and everyday people, binding the living and the dead into one shared ceremonial landscape. Echoes. The objects from that sealed tomb point to about 350 CE, and with them comes a bridge across time. These relics do more than look old. They show ties that reached far beyond Chochkitam. The mosaic mask, the carved bones, and the rare Spondylus shells connect this king to two major centers: Tikal, the great Maya city nearby, and Teotihuacan, the large urban center in central Mexico. In the mid-4th century, Teotihuacan shaped art, goods, and political life across Mesoamerica. Finding its influence in a Peten tomb means the local ruler might have joined alliances, marriage ties, or power plays that involved distant elites. The bones carved with names and the mask of a god suggest more than private wealth. They point to public ritual duty and official claims made in stone. This discovery also shines light on faith and royal succession. The mask and carved bones do not read as simple ornaments. They tell of ritual power. Kings used masks, sacred shells, and carved words to show they stood between people and gods. The presence of a storm god and other divine images hints at ceremonies that mixed sacrifice, display, and sacred law, things that helped secure a ruler's place. The site's modern story gives the find extra meaning. Tulane's Middle American Research Institute first worked here a century ago, when Fran Bloom explored the ruins in 1924. For decades, the site suffered looting and guesswork. When Estrada-Belli's team began careful fieldwork in 2019, they used new tools and methodical digs. The tomb they revealed in 2022 is the result of patient work that let intact objects finally speak. Marcello A. Canuto of Tulane says discoveries like this show why serious, focused study matters. These finds don't simply add artifacts to a museum case. They rewrite parts of the story about politics, religion, and how power moved between cities. Each carved glyph and each imported shell changes the picture. The work continues. Researchers will analyze isotopes in teeth and bones to map childhood diets and migrations, study residue on pottery to learn rituals and offerings, and compare art styles to track trade routes. Each scientific test will sharpen the image of who this king was and how his world worked in detail. For now, the relics act like echoes from 350 CE, small sounds that, when listened to closely, reveal a wide, connected world. The tomb did not just hold a king, It held proof that people then navigated long-distance ties of power, faith, and kinship. With careful study, those echoes may soon become words, and the lives behind them will step more clearly into view. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. Deep in the heart of Mesoamerica, the Maya civilization once flourished across present-day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. Known for their sophisticated writing system, advanced mathematics, and intricate calendar, the Maya created towering temples, elaborate cities, and vibrant marketplaces that pulsed with life. Their culture revolved around powerful rulers, complex religious rituals, and a deep connection to astronomy. From the rainforests of Petén to the limestone plateaus of the Yucatan, every corner of their world told a story of innovation and mystery. Scientists just opened an untouched Mayan tomb, and what they found inside is terrifying. But beyond the headlines, the legacy of the Maya is seen in their enduring influence on language, art, and architecture throughout Central America. Even after their great cities fell into ruin, the Maya spirit lived on, carried by their descendants who still keep traditions alive today. Glyphs alive. More than 6 million people still speak languages that grew out of the Maya world. That living link is powerful, but one big voice from that past was nearly lost: the Maya written script. Once, the Maya wrote on bark books called codices and carved words on stone, pottery, and monuments. But almost all those books vanished during the Spanish conquest in the 1500s. Only 3 Maya codices survived. With so many texts destroyed, the keys to reading the old writing seemed gone, and for a long time, the carved signs looked like pretty pictures rather than words. For over a century, many scholars thought the script might be only symbolic art. The signs are striking: humans, animals, gods, and strange patterns, and they can look decorative at first glance. Yet careful study showed something else. The system was not just pictures. It was a full writing system, able to say anything people could speak. The script works as a logosyllabic system. That means some signs stand for whole words or ideas, while others stand for sounds or syllables. Once researchers realized the script mixed word signs and sound signs, reading it became possible. The first big step came in the 1950s, when a Russian linguist showed that parts of the glyphs were phonetic, that they stood for sounds. That discovery opened the door. Interest grew through the 1970s and 1980s, as more linguists and archaeologists joined the work. By the end of the 1980s, the Maya script was finally accepted as a true writing system. Scholars began to read dates, names, and events carved into stone and painted on pottery. They even began to tell stories the Maya themselves had set down. Researchers also learned that the glyphs record different Maya languages. So far, at least 2 major Mayan languages have been clearly identified in the inscriptions, and there's good reason to think another one appears as well. That detail matters because it shows the written record captured a range of voices across the Maya world. Still, mysteries remain. About 15% of the script is completely unknown, according to the material in the extract. That last chunk holds the trickiest signs and the deepest puzzles. Solving them would bring major new knowledge about Maya history, politics, and beliefs. Help is coming from surprising places. The internet now lets scholars share pictures, notes, and ideas quickly. Online initiatives make it easier for experts around the world to compare readings and test new ideas. One such effort is a site called Maya Decipherment, launched in 2013 and run by University of Texas archaeologist David Stewart. The site is a place where scholars and serious amateurs can post new inscriptions, refine translations, and debate tricky points. That kind of open, shared work speeds progress. Today, more than 30 scholars work on the script, each chipping away at the puzzle. Their work matters beyond academia. Every glyph they read restores a voice from the past and helps living Maya people reconnect with their history. Decipherment is not just about solving a code. It's about reviving names, events, and ideas that colonial fires tried to erase. Progress has been steady. Signs that once looked like mystery art are now read as names, dates, and rulings. Still, that remaining 15% holds surprises. Unlocking it would change many details about how the Maya lived, ruled, and spoke. The story is hopeful. The Maya left a rich written legacy carved in stone and painted on pots. Though much was lost, the surviving signs are speaking louder than they did decades ago. New benchmark. Finding a tomb that has stayed almost untouched is a big deal. Why? Because the objects are still where they were placed long ago. That in situ moment gives researchers a clear picture of how things were used and arranged. It's like opening a time-locked room and reading the scene exactly as it was set. For archaeologists, that is rare and priceless. Right now, lab work is happening fast and carefully. Scientists are doing DNA tests and checking the materials that make up each object. Those studies can tell where the jade, shell, and clay came from. DNA might even reveal family ties. Material tests show trade routes and craftsmanship. Every result builds a more accurate story of who this king was and how his world worked. The carved bones were sent to epigraphers who compared the marks to big databases. Early reads point to strong ancestor worship and complex cult practices. That fits with the objects found: masks, vessels, shells, that all seem chosen to support ritual and memory. Specialists hope the full translations will unlock the dynasty's lost history. Organic remains are especially exciting. Traces of ceremonial drinks and other residues survived inside pots. Chemical residue testing could identify specific ingredients that archaeologists rarely see. That kind of detail tells us what people drank in rites, how they fed the spirits, and what foods mattered in elite ceremonies. Small things like that add up to a fuller picture of society, trade, and belief. The team is not stopping at the tomb. Plans call for more digs nearby to find related structures. If additional burials or buildings turn up, they could show Chochkitam as a real dynastic center rather than a one-off find. That would change how scholars map ancient power in the region. This project is also a model for modern archaeology. It brings together geology, chemistry, art history, and other fields. That mix of skills helps turn fragments into meaning. The careful recording and modern preservation methods used here set a new standard, especially important in a region where looting and sloppy digs have robbed much context from other sites. All data from the tomb are being fed into digital databases that link findings across Mesoamerica. That lets researchers compare patterns of burial, trade, and ritual on a large scale. Already, the discovery has prompted new research proposals and funding offers. Papers and reports are in the works, and experts plan future meetings to share results.